because they don't work very well, and also because they don't pay us to say their name on stream, that we use to communicate via chat messages that maybe rhymes with Bloom is not doing too well today. So hopefully we will be here the entire time. But if not, we apologize beforehand.
Trying to see chat. Oh, here it is.
Very good to not actually name the program. Also, apparently we lost some uploads. I think episode 6 and 7 never got uploaded onto YouTube, so they'll also be lost episodes. It'll be great.
Eventually, though, we can probably find them and do like a supercut of lost episodes. That might be kind of cool.
I don't know how we would find them.
Oh, they're just gone?
Just gone, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just all right. What do we think that this episode's name should be?
There's too many things that have.
Oh shoot!
There's too many things that have.
Okay, that should fix it now. I actually had the stream open, so some people are going to get a very nasty surprise of reverb. Episode 11.
Well, we've already done Conserve Apocalypse. I don't really want to call it Wall Street Apocalypse. So, I don't know, man. See, it feels like we've had too many crazy Wednesdays in a row for us to just make a joke about it being like just a normal Wednesday. Or have we had enough crazy Wednesdays in a row for it to be just another Wednesday?
I don't know. I don't think every Wednesday you have Bro Street Boys destroying hedge funds.
That's true, but it's also not every Wednesday that you have the Capitol getting rioted at. So
that's true.
And it's not every Wednesday that you get
an inauguration.
Yeah. So we've had like 3 weeks in a row of whack shit happening on Wednesdays. Oh, that might be a good name for it. Another whack shit Wednesday.
Well, I think that we should be more specific about the wackiness of it, though. So let's call it
Wacky Wall Street Wednesday.
Huh?
Wacky Wall Street Wednesday.
Sure.
All right, wonderful. Now,
all right. So the first topic that we're talking about today is a little bit more of a serious topic, something that we both have talked about on multiple occasions, particularly the ills and potential side effects of authoritarian regimes and how they can be extraordinarily destructive. And one of those authoritarian regimes that was okay, I'm gonna not do that. One of those authoritarian regimes that was not particularly good to its people was the fall of the Weimar Republic and the control of the country of Germany by the Nazi Party from what, like 33 to something?
35 to 45 or 32 to 45. I forget the exact number.
Hi, Snoopledoop. How are you today?
Snoopledoop is me, by the way.
Oh. So how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I was hoping to get some chat engagement.
That's good. I'm happy that you're doing well. So let's talk about Holocaust Remembrance Day. So it's a very interesting and unique holiday. I want to put it out there.
Is holiday appropriate?
I mean, I guess it's not a federal holiday, right? So
it's more of a day of mourning, day of commemoration day, maybe.
Commemoration. Okay, yeah. Possibly. The oddity of it, though, is that it's the one that still tends to get celebrated or mourned over by a large population of people. Most of the other ones, I mean, we have other Remembrance Days if people don't realize this, right? Like the other two that are very obvious are Memorial Day. Memorial Day is the most obvious one. It's a day of remembrance. Right? Not to be confused with Veterans Day, which is not about dead people necessarily.
Would Armistice Day?
Yeah, Armistice Day count? But I don't think that's not a big holiday here, right?
Right. but it's a big holiday in Europe.
Is it?
Yeah, yeah, it's much larger in Europe. So the reason that I wanted to talk about this was because I think number one, it's an important day to acknowledge. I think that the whole never forget thing is very important, and it's generally like a positive message for people to carry with them and for us to take time to think about every year. However, I also think that this is a day that gets cynically co-opted in a lot of ways by a lot of different actors with a lot of different interests. For example, you have a lot of your moderates and conservatives who don't want to necessarily think about the creeping authoritarianism in this country, and who will still make their little Holocaust Remembrance Day post because, just like they made their MLK Day post a few weeks ago. Um, and it's kind of their sign that, look, I'm a good person. Racism is bad, individual harm and hate is bad, and blah 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 blah, without ever having like to more broadly engage with the way that those things are emergent properties of the culture in which we live. I think it's important that we as Americans think about this day, because a lot of the technologies and methods that were applied by the Nazis in their mass extermination of the Jews, Roma, disabled people, and homosexuals was largely innovated here. A lot of it in this very state that you and I are broadcasting from, which is the great state of Texas. Specifically, a lot of the immigration issues at the border, the pesticide Zyklon B was used on women that were immigrating from Mexico or coming across the border for work, because it was believed that they were dirty and were bringing over animals that were bringing, like fleas that were bringing disease and stuff like that. And so it's not too far from the sort of cleaning areas in the U.S. border that gave a lot of people cancer to the showers and mass extermination camps in Dachau and Auschwitz-Birkenau and Treblinka and the other camps in Poland whose names are escaping me right now.
That is an interesting factoid, though. Have you ever recognized that all of the camps that were the death camps weren't in Germany?
Well, they weren't in Germany because they didn't want, they were clearing it for the they were clearing it for the new land. And Dachau was while it was not technically classified by the Reich as a death camp, it like functioned as one.
Isn't it the camp where they would just work people to death, right?
It was more of a work camp, but they did have like extermination stuff there. I think they piloted a lot of things there, if I remember correctly. I went back in 2000. I went to Dachau in 2011, so it's been a while since I've been. But I remember seeing the crematorium, so that might have just been something they do for workers. I don't really remember if they carried out any mass executions there. But the reason that they were all in Poland is because they were trying to clear the new land that they were going to use to expand the Reich to the east.
Lebensraum.
There we go. That's the name. Speaking of, last week I watched a docuseries that I had wanted to watch for a while. That was it looked like it might be pretty hokey, so I was watching it expecting it to be bad or one of those documentaries about the Nazis that kind of fetishizes them a little bit. But I was pleasantly surprised that it was not. And it's called Hitler's Inner Circle. You can watch it on Netflix. It is phenomenal. It does a really good job of showing not only the sort of like inner tensions of that regime, but also showing what a bunch of complete dumbasses they were, which I think is really important for us to do. I think and I think I've said this before, but I think we too often make them out to be these like competent war fighters who had all but for some contingencies of history would have swept across Europe and defeated everybody. It's just this docuseries makes it very.
Maybe if they would have let Edwin Rommel lead the charge.
Yeah.
All of the best generals of the German Reich were removed from the primary places in which they would be needed because they overstepped and they became too popular.
A lot of this is something that they point out to really close. Like, for example, Himmler was not a trained soldier and he's overseeing the SS. And so when it comes down to the The name of the German army
The
is
Wehrmacht.
the Wehrmacht. There we go. When it comes to like this ego contest between the Wehrmacht and the SS, the competent generals are all in the Wehrmacht. They're not in the SS. Anyway, I don't want to talk too much about Nazis because like they're kind of incidental to this. We should be focused more on like the victims of those atrocities and those regimes. And I think it's important that even after Trump is now out of office, that should be a dire warning that it can happen here. We have a lot of crazy wackadoodle Republicans in office. We have a lot of liberals in office who are willing to let it happen. This country can slip into the grips of authoritarianism. And we very nearly did. The more information that comes out about January the 6th, the more it seems like there was a narrower version of a power grab by right-wing ultranationalists.
So, yeah, I think that like what we need to, I think there's two things that we need to remember from this particular Remembrance Day. The first is obviously the extraordinary loss of lives by the Jewish population is the one that we talk about the most, but also, I mean, functionally, all of the Polish gypsies were wiped out by this, right?
Well, it was Roma people in general.
Roma people in general were largely wiped out by this. Also, like homosexual, disabled individuals were also killed, including Germans and Poles and everybody. If you had a kid that was disabled, they were just put down. And it was these sorts of, it wasn't just, the Holocaust itself is not just the camps, right? But it is the entire program of terror and destruction and murder that accompanied all of those things, right? So, for instance, like very famous, most people describe the start of the Holocaust starts with the Glasnost, right? Is that how you say it? The night of broken glass.
Glasnost. Wait, Glasnost is Russian. That's the reconciliation stuff.
But the night of broken glass, right?
Oh, Kristallnacht.
Yeah, and that is really the first time in which there are, mass attempts at intimidation of Jewish persons and Jewish businesses and taking them over. And many people describe that as the start of the Holocaust itself. And I think that that's a really interesting distinction that we should be having and should be looking at, is that like the Holocaust or the beginnings of it do not start with Zyklon B and gassing Jewish people by the thousands in showers, right? It starts with brigands breaking into businesses based on ethnocentric understandings and dehumanizing groups of people to the point in which that seems to be justified. So, the slippery slope is a fallacy, right? And a lot of people don't understand that. Like, we're, as debate coaches, we clearly understand that, like, just because you're going at it in a certain direction doesn't mean you can't stop, right? Like, history shows us that all the time, right? If that were true, then America would have been a fascist dictatorship multiple times. It hasn't gotten there because you can actually stop. But recognizing all of the steps you take to get to those sorts of places is really important. And one of those steps that we've done before and that we do still is the demonizing, dehumanization of particular groups of people for whatever reason, right? Whether it be the color of their skin or their immigration status, right? Or whatever other reason or rationale that individuals give. And then I think the second important aspect of this is to understand that this is a day in which we remember, the end point, which is that a large portion of the Western world came together to defeat Nazism as well, right? Was it because they were a fascist dictatorship? No. But what ended up happening with that is that it created a precipice for Western democracies where the discussion of going towards that is always seen as a removal from the Western order. And is probably the only reason why Europe is a singular entity right now.
Yeah, a lot of like the pan-European movement, basically.
Yeah, because like the idea that like anyone who goes towards ultranationalism now in Europe is seen as a crazy person.
Right? Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of the original theorists behind the EU in the 70s were like, they were of Jewish descent, and they were, children of people who survived the Holocaust. Um, One last thing on this before we kind of move off of the Holocaust Remembrance Day blurb, but I think it's important that we think critically also about like the way that this day is used rhetorically by people who are very invested in the project of Zionism and in like the active like and who are supportive of the active genocide of the Palestinian people, and whether or not we think that like you know. Hamas is a good entity or a bad entity, and whether or not whatever we think about those conflicts, we need to be aware of the way that this conflict is used rhetorically by people who are on one side of it, or the way that this day is used by people who are on one side of that.
Yeah, I mean, like Zionism is all about using the Holocaust in history, and there's a much larger history of the hatred of Jewish persons within Europe in particular, right? A very very large history of that. So
Mm-hmm.
they use those sorts of histories as justifications for why they get to do the same thing to. And it
Well,
seems
there's
to
also
be.
like this whole narrative that like Palestinian people or people who came into power in Palestine, I forget what it is, but that those people are like that were sympathetic to Hitler, and that they, and I'm not sure how true any of that is. I'm not like my history on that area is not super good right now. So but I think it's nonetheless, I think it's important that we are cognizant of the use of this day, the invocation of this day, or of the Holocaust in general, as sort of a rhetorical artifact that gets used to justify the political project of Zionism.
you know, and there's some incredible um, academic literature on these sorts of discussions. But not only the discussion, so like there's one side which is called Holocaust trivialization, which is like calling other things that aren't the Holocaust a Holocaust, right? That's one side of it, and sometimes that gets a little bit Zionist, right? But the other side of it is the discussion of how the Holocaust is used to scapegoat groups, and the portion of like no genocide can there are genocides in world history that are greater than the Holocaust, right? We have the Congolese genocide under Ferdinand, right? And somewhere between 10 and 15 million Africans died in that process of that genocide, right? So,
Colonization of this country,
huh?
the colonization of this country, and the subsequent transatlantic slave trade that basically
Even
served
if
as
we don't hold Europeans responsible for disease, which would be a ridiculous revisionism on history, even if we don't do that, right? You can still look at the Congo and go like, no, 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 no. They literally beat people to death, shot them in the head, cut their arms off, till 15 million people died, right? So like, there's this sort of distinction where it's like the Holocaust is a horrible, horrible, horrible thing, but the reason why it has a special place within our society is because those people were white,
yeah.
right? There's not a Congolese Remembrance Day. There's not a Darkest Hour Remembrance Day, right? In fact, nobody even knew it was occurring until like, what was it? She was like a Baptist missionary in the Congo has a child's foot brought to her, right? And then pictures are taken and it sets off from there.
Well, and let's not forget that in this country we celebrate Columbus Day.
Well, some people celebrate Columbus.
Yeah, some people but the point is that people celebrate Columbus Day, they celebrate Thanksgiving, and those are basically like let's apologize for Genocide Day.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. So, from dark and dreary to
Funny and kind of
people
awesome.
screwing with capitalism.
I have to get my notes out for this because I like legitimately am.
All right. So I'll give the basic rundown.
Okay.
The layman's rundown or the laywoman's rundown. That was woman with a Y, by the way.
Layperson.
Huh?
Layperson.
Layperson. Rundown is there was a Reddit subreddit called R Wall Street Bets. Now, if you know anything about R Wall Street Bets, which I'm assuming nobody does before this, I would assume that you don't know hardly any of their history, but basically what they are is the worst place on the internet to ever get advice about the Wall Street ever. However, there's enough people on there that when they make a move, sometimes it has an effect. And so it's a bunch of Wall Street bros. Most of them are not actual traders, and most of them are like, they have their E-Trade up on their other computer kind of people, right? These aren't like mass investors for the most part, and they specialize on making money on short trades. That is
Can
what
you
Wall
give the
Street Bets is
example?
all
Can
about.
you, can you give the example that you gave me earlier when you were like filling me in on
So I'm not
background?
certain of the exact country, but I think it was Azerbaijan. One thing that they did was they would sometimes manipulate other countries' currencies by propping up those currencies with purchases via the use of the euro, the pound, and the dollar. If you know anything about the euro, the pound, and the dollar, those are all very, very, very stable currencies. So they would do this. They would increase the price of that particular country's currency. The effect of this is normally that you'll get other buy-ins from other actors because they'll see the price going up and they'll be like, okay, I can buy in and try to short sell. But what would end up happening is Wall Street Bets would just pull the plug and would despike the currency, and some other investors would then despike the currency. And then people who had legitimate investments in Azerbaijan's currency would also leave the market. So what it does is it crashes their currency because millions of dollars of dollar denominated, euro denominated, or pound denominated currency is flooded out of their economic currency. Um, and this is a very common tactic done by extraordinarily wealthy individuals. And in a lot of countries, it is not illegal in a currency market.
Mm-hmm.
However,
So,
if you did this to a business on a federally traded website, you would have a fun little call from the FCC. If you did it by yourself and you were doing it on purpose.
well, and if you were doing it with, yeah. So what happened today that is of interest here is that a large group of these people from our Wall Street Bets noticed that GameStop and other companies with low stocks were prime for short selling. I'll explain what short selling is in just a little bit, but they were prime for short selling. And when they looked at sort of the amount that the companies that these hedge funds had short sold, they had short sold 100% of the stock. This means that when those people go and buy those stocks, it messes with the company. It messes with the hedge fund because it drives up the stock price. So let's backtrack a little bit. Let's talk about short selling. I'll explain what that is with the help of an Investopedia article. So it is short selling is an investment or trading strategy which speculates on the decline in a stock or other security price. It is an advanced strategy that should only be undertaken by experienced traders and investors. Traders may use short selling as speculation, and investors or blah, 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 blah. We don't care about any of that. In short selling, a position is opened by borrowing shares of a stock or other asset that the investor believes will decrease in value by a set future date, the expiration date. The investor then sells these borrowed shares to buyers willing to pay the market price. Before the borrowed shares must be returned, the trader is betting that the price will continue to decline and that they can purchase them at a lower cost, meaning that they make a profit. So what these people have done today is they have driven up the cost and now made it to where when these hedge funds have to buy the stock back, but at a higher price. So now it is costing them money to purchase these stocks. Now, to use GameStop as an example, well, I gotta look at the GameStop stock right now. So GameStop stock is currently valued at $347.51 a share. If it stays above 160 until Friday morning when the markets open, the company that owns the stock, or that is the collector on the stock, is the name of it is Melvin Capital. Melvin Capital will go bankrupt. They have already lost $1.9 billion on this. And there are several other hedge funds that are being hit by this because of their investments in companies like AMC and BlackBerry, which were also having which were similarly predicted to decline, but our Wall Street bets identified them, and people are making quite a bit of money off of this. So that's very funny that, the rich capitalists that have basically fucked up the rest of our society are now getting a taste of their own medicine. That's very funny and karmic in a cosmic sense. But these rich billionaires who have access to government officials and can kind of do what they want, these people are now arguing that, number one, this should be treated as stock manipulation. And as I have had it explained to me by people who are much more informed on, how the market works, stock market works, there's not really a good legal case for that, because what they did was totally legal. And this would kind of undermine a lot of the sort of like best stocks to buy in 2020, 21, or 2022 list or whatever. It would basically undermine a whole current of the market. Like there would be a lot of shows on CNBC that couldn't exist if you were to make this illegal. So it seems that they don't have a good legal argument for saying that it's stock manipulation. But there are also calls for regulation. The president of the NASDAQ was on CNBC today talking about how they need to introduce new regulation. And the form that regulation takes could hurt small dollar investors who are investing through apps like Acorn or what's the other one? No, not E-Trade. Chat, help me out. Robinhood. There we go. Thank you, Matt. Yeah, 136 of the stock actually. Okay, so I was a little bit wrong, but generally that's the general picture. And this is just very funny and very interesting to me. I don't know, Nick.
You know what though? I want to say this. The number of times they've tried to buy a video game from me for $7 makes it all worth it.
Well, GameStop is probably going to hurt in the long run because of this. Like they're still like, this doesn't really do anything for them.
Well, I mean, it takes out the backing that's behind their company, right? Like if those funds go down, they would likely not have the ability to have injections of capital that are likely keeping their businesses alive.
Yeah. I think that this will probably, like, honestly, independently of what ends up happening in terms of regulation, this is going to be taught in economics courses and like studied by economists for a very long time. I mean, there are economists who study EVE Online. For those of you who don't know, EVE Online is an MMORPG that has one of the world's largest. Oh, go for it.
I play this game.
Okay. Can you explain what EVE is?
So imagine
and why economists are interested in
it. Well, the reason economists are interested in it is because it has
hold on, explain the game, then why economists are interested.
It's a spaceship game. You build things and you blow them up. It's literally all you do in the game. You build a bunch of stuff, you put stuff on ships, you fly ships, you shoot each other, and when something blows up, some of the stuff dies and some of the stuff doesn't die. But what's important about this is it has a creation-destruction economy, completely based off of creation and destruction, but also there are zero functional rules on the economy, right? I'll give you a very good, for instance, there's this very particular module that used to be very, very expensive, and it didn't make sense that it was expensive because it's a very small module. It's called a small armor repair, right? Ancillary armor repair. The reason it was so expensive was because one person with lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of money spent 6.5 months buying every single one of them off the market, buying them all and hoarding them all, and then increased the price by 300 to 400%. So the reason why economists are so interested in the economy is because it doesn't have laws or regulations that prevent individuals from doing things like this. The only thing that prevents people from doing things like this are other players and their interactions in the game. However, this is a rare instance because what happened was the way that this would have never been fixed. I want to be very clear about this. This would have never stopped. This person would have controlled that market forever because he had too much of the market capitalization. So what the game designer, which is called CCP Games, they're a small Icelandic company, did was they introduced a brand new way to receive that module in the game, and then they massively increased the number of them in the game over a very, very short period of time, basically undercut this person's entire market, right? The equivalent would be like, let's say Eric bought all of the My Pillows in the United States, and just owned every single My Pillow, and everybody wanted a My Pillow, and we couldn't get them. And then
Why the fuck would
China
everybody want
mass
a My
produced
Pillow?
My Pillows.
Why the fuck would anybody want a My Pillow though?
Well, I mean, he got banned from Twitter.
He's edgy now.
You know?
Okay, so on
Not
the
the
Young
softest,
Zizek
most
says that
comfortable
I'm
pillow in the world. It's the edgiest pillow in the world. Okay?
Young Zizek seems to think that I'm a My Pillow fan. I'm much more into the pillow cube because I'm a side sleeper.
Eric knows that Eric is definitely a My Pillow fan.
No, I'm definitely a pillow cube person. I need something that fills my neck hole.
Fills your neck hole.
Have you not seen the ads for those?
No, I don't watch pillow ads.
It popped up on YouTube one time for me, but basically it's a
Did
pillow.
Did you buy a pillow online?
No, I did not. I still have my same pillows. They're not My Pillows though.
Doesn't it sound to y'all like Eric was on the My Pillow website too often, and then Google ads caught him? That's why he gets cube pillow ads now.
Maybe, I don't know. Y'all have to find out.
Seems reasonable.
Okay.
But basically, the reason the game's so interesting is because there aren't any things that prevent absolute monopolization from occurring.
So I guess,
except for other people making things.
Right. And this is going to be one of those things that gets studied for a long time because it's a rare event in economics that actually provides like a lot of raw data that people can look at, and they can use it to understand kind of like market behaviors. I don't know. I had a longer thread of that, but it would kind of go into my screed against economics as a discipline, which we don't want to subject people to.
I don't know. Have you seen the names of the people in our chat? I have a feeling they're down for the just taking economist and putting them to the coals. Seems like that might be our viewership, is putting economist, tar and feathering economist might be on the to-do list of our viewership. I don't know.
I mean, look, my criticism of economics comes from my time as a anthropology minor, and that's literally it. Is just that economists believe a lot of made up bullshit that came out at the beginning of oh shit.
I told you that our viewership appreciates our anti-economist views.
I don't know if they need to be the first. Like Milton Friedman would if he was still alive, but no, I think that I think that like economists believe a lot of made up bullshit and then they assert it as fact, and a lot of it like goes against the observed data about like human behavior and the ways that David Graeber's Debt the First 5,000 Years is a phenomenal book on this subject, where he basically talks about like all of the foundational myths of economics. Which, by the way, this book, the debt book by David Graeber, is far better than the History of Money by Neil Ferguson, which I also liked. For a conservative, like he's actually like a pretty decent writer, and he contextualized a lot of stuff in history that I didn't know.
But some of the stuff that he contextualizes is actually
yeah.
He's not a historian; it's very obvious.
Yeah, it's very obvious, but it is a good general discussion of like the emergence of markets and something I had never thought about that that book made me think about was the role of the Battle of New Orleans on the Southern economy. Basically, like the reason that they lost the war was less of any military thing and more that like they had backed everything up by cotton bonds that were sold to, they had backed their entire economy on cotton bonds that were sold to Europe. And after the port of New Orleans was blockaded, all the European countries tanked their cotton bond, like they got rid of their cotton bonds, and no one was buying cotton from the South anymore, and so they couldn't really sustain a workable economy.
Well, yeah, I mean, like you look at I mean, just let's not talk about Civil War history today, but if you look at the early stages of that war, I mean, it's going terribly for the Union.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing the Union has that the Confederacy didn't have was a real navy.
Yeah. But I think that the Graeber book is better on this history because he like Ferguson takes the assumptions of economics as fact rather than like fictions that a bunch of dudes in Scotland, namely David Hume and Adam Smith and David Ricardo came up with. And he engages with those seriously. Whereas Graeber says that like these are stupid myths that people with limited exposure of the world came up with, and then when presented with other evidence, ignored.
Well, yeah, I mean, like
Because there were anthropological accounts from like Jesuits about like the different modes of exchange that existed in indigenous people during pre-Columbian times and stuff like that. There were accounts of like cultures in Africa and stuff like that that these European dudes had access to. So like when economics as a discipline was being formed, they didn't have to base it on the sort of market conditions that they were observing in Scotland. They chose to like maintain those same assumptions because they did what Europeans have done historically in every context, which is assume themselves as the best picture of progress, the sort of like the foundational image of man, and assumed that their way of life is the best way of life, and that that's the way that everybody else lives. So there's this assumption that like all people approach exchange transactionally, like you would in a market, which is historically and anthropologically not
so
the case.
interestingly enough, like even like in the American economy in previous periods of time, right? Like, we don't think of things like this, but like farmers in like the 40s and 50s, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we were both farmers, Eric, and I needed to borrow your tractor, I wouldn't give you money. You'd let me borrow your tractor, and I'd go use your tractor, and then I'd bring it back, and then I would give you something typically for it, right?
I found out yesterday that when Kansas was first being, settled, that people used corn whiskey as a medium of exchange.
Yeah, but so from my understanding of southwestern Louisiana, one of the primary commodities of exchange were chickens because everybody had chickens. They were a direct source of protein and meat. And so if you did something nice for me, I'd give you eggs if it was something small and chickens if it was something big. But we all had chickens, right? So you had 50 chickens, I had 80 chickens. We all had chickens and we had to feed them grain. And we did these sorts of things, right, all the time. But that's immediate exchange. Another example is Mali during the period of Mansa Musa, where the primary the way that they traded was through salt.
Right. That was actually common in Rome too. But one of the things that that Graeber points out is that not everything needs a medium of exchange. Like he cites one example of a tribe where basically everything is like they exchange goods for like sort of like sexual favors and wives, basically.
Okay.
Like
oh, you can look at the Nigerian culture of big man culture, and within that particular culture, right? Like, so not talking about ass here. This is what my undergraduate dissertation was on. One of the ways that it worked in their society was a singular person was responsible for the care of the entire village, right? but everybody paid that person so that everyone would be taken care of by everyone in the village would be taken care of. What it created was a very wealthy individual who then used that wealth, in theory, to spread that amongst all of the people so that they all had what they needed. So no one goes hungry, no one goes without a home, no one goes without clothing, right? Now, your production is still rewarded because you get extra things that you pay a tithe functionally, right? And that's a totally different economic system, right? The exchange of goods and needed goods is not actually through a governmental system or a true taxation, but rather through a singular individual, an elder, right? And this is during the time of bead trade within Nigerian culture, and so they would start to these villages would compete with one another, and the way that they would compete with one another was by who could produce enough stuff to get their big man and his wives more beads, and whoever had more beads was showing that they were the greater society. But the modem of exchange was never beads, but rather giving wealth to the individuals so that they could maintain wealth of all the people. And if a big man were to not do that, then they would be deposed very quickly and very violently, right?
Yeah.
So there was an immediate threat on life to a big man who like hoarded wealth. Right? So
You had to be generous.
it'd be like we already all give our money to Jeff Bezos, but now he's responsible for making sure we all survive. If he doesn't, then we kill him.
That's getting into like some Nick Land, that's getting into some Nick Land bullshit that we don't want to talk about. We don't want to endorse on here.
Listen, I know that when the revolution comes, young Zizek will be on my side. Okay? That's all I know.
So one of the things that I think is really important here is that like when we're talking about these lessons, and like this is from a like explicitly leftist perspective, but one of the like main problems that occurs when we have like this left sectarianism is you have Marxists and anarchists who don't like talking to each other very much. And one of the things that I think, Marxism has a huge advantage in that it gives you a great framework to organize around. It promotes like sort of like that idea of like centralized institutions and stuff like that you need in order to effectively combat other institutions. But one of the blind spots of Marxism is the obvious, which is that sometimes that often has the side effect of sliding into authoritarianism when human nature kicks in and people want to be the big man of the party. But you also have another side, which is that Marxism is grounded fundamentally in Western theories of economics and exchange. And while Marxism has been used by non-Western peoples in liberatory efforts, it might be useful for us in looking at like the founding of a new society and the push towards like different ways of being in the world that aren't as violent, to maybe look outside of that Western tradition of thought and to maybe look at the ways that that other societies, that other cultures have engaged in exchange and community organization and relation between individuals. Which is why I think that the David Graeber book is phenomenal. It's why I think that Carceral Capitalism by Jackie Wang is phenomenal. And it's why I think The Undercommons by Fred Moten and Stefano Harney is possible, because those books all kind of grapple with this question to some degree or another. What should exchange between individuals look like? How ought we to organize our society within the within a framework of where we have to owe each other things?
We owe each other.
Well, according to Moten and Harney, we always do. We can't ever you can never pay the debt.
That's assuming that that's giving a lot of ontological and metaphysical energy to the conceptualization of debt, though.
For sure. And I think that's a criticism of that. But I think foundationally, the reason I reference those other texts is because they reference the Graeber book in terms of how some of the ways he references debt. They use his historical examples, and they have sort of an ancillary connection to this book that I think is very interesting. 'Interesting.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I think that that's giving a lot of ontological and metaphysical energy to the conceptualization of debt, though. For sure. And I think that that's a criticism of that. But Well, we can talk about Moden and Harney in a future episode because I would actually like to talk about different philosophers in that way. And I don't know if
Well,
they would
Mo's a
refer to
Deleuzian.
themselves as
That's why I like
philosophers,
him.
right? Huh?
I
What'd you say?
said Moten's a Deleuzian. That's why I like him.
That makes sense. Eric fanboys Deleuze so hard that he fanboys everyone who even references Deleuze in their books,
That's a lie. I don't like Nick
including
Land.
Baudrillard.
I don't like Nick Land.
Oh, it's probably because he has the name Nick. Nicks are assholes.
No, because he's a fucking fascist. I do have his book on Bataille, though.
Oh, so it's a lie.
I don't like him. I have his book.
Speaking of very interesting writers that are also fascist, I found out recently that Sloterdijk is apparently a pretty aggressive German fascist.
Oh yeah, like Sloterdijk is like virulently right wing.
He's also like, yes, it's okay to call immigrants dirty.
Yeah, he's the only reason that Sloterdijk is interesting is as a counterpoint to the sort of Jordan Peterson talking point that that Pomo is left wing bullshit, because it's clearly right wing bullshit too.
I don't know. It's interesting, right? Like, in the amount of papers that are written that are comparing, contrasting Sloterdijk with Deleuze, like, blow my mind.
Yeah, I think that like people who are critical of Deleuze would say that like he sounds like a left winger, but he's a fascist. Like I think that like that's the opinion that people like Zizek have, and who else have that opinion? I forget. There's somebody else who's like not a fan of Deleuze on the from the left. That anyway doesn't matter. I think that's why I think it's a descriptive theory. I think it can be used by the left, right, and center to good or ill.
All right. So, Wall Street Bets shows us that capitalism is a fatalistic system, very easily destroyed by just domination of a few bros who like to make short bets on things. We can reproduce this exact same outcome hundreds of more times. Perhaps we can destroy capitalism through what's it called? What's it called? When hyper accelerationism of the already market demand systems.
Oh, that's how you get to like the neo-techno feudalism that Nick Land wants.
Oh no, not the bubbles. Not the bubbles, Zizek says. For those of you who don't understand, Sloterdijk's entire conceptualization of social order is that we live and exist within bubbles, right? So that's the joke, is that the social is bubbles, right?
So in some of my classes, I'm showing a debate documentary and debate team. It's the one with the West Georgia Liberation Front. There's a part in there where they reference
Michigan team
people
came up with something new. Okay, no, they didn't.
No,
you're just the WGLF.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I know. I show it in class as well. But we're showing it. So I'm showing it to like, freshmen and sophomores who aren't used to that style of debate, and I was like, this just made me think of the part in there where he's referencing people being hermetically sealed within the bubble dome of Logan's Run.
My favorite thing is when somebody read some critique against him. He read Maoist papers that said, if you don't know the structure of what you speak, you may not speak. The best answer to the Maoism K I've ever heard in my entire life.
That's hilarious.
You don't have intimate, direct knowledge of what you speak of, then you may not speak. Mao. I revoked the right to speak.
Okay. Well, let's move on from like the hardline lefty stuff to, I guess, like our more normie centrist stuff that we have to talk about because of the society we live in.
We could just burn it all down.
But then, like, I'm not down with anarcho-primitivism.
I don't think we'd ever go to primitivism.
Well, I'm just saying that
I'm
like
not,
we
I'm
need
not
medical
advocating for the
infrastructure. Otherwise, our
DDEV,
trans
okay?
comrades can't live, and
I'm
our
not
disabled
trainer,
comrades can't
all
live.
right? I'm not advocating for the DDEV. I'm not Malthus. I'm not saying we should kill half the population, right? Like, calm down. Not Spark, right?
All
I
right.
agree. Whatever that society would look like, they need to include frozen pizza.
Yeah, they definitely do include for.
Sure. All right, so let's talk about Biden climate change. Progressive climate change stuff is happening in the status quo. We'll do kind of chronologically if that works for you, Eric.
Yeah, that's fine.
First thing he did, very big. It was on his first day in the White House. In fact, was canceled all of the permits for the extension of the XL pipeline. It's been a contentious political hot button issue for a while now. Interestingly enough, I was reading a bunch of stuff about this because oil people were losing their goddamn minds.
Yeah, I saw
It's
you
really
engage.
not having much of an effect on the oil economy, largely because it was an extension of an already existing pipeline. It did make the pipeline more efficient, but it doesn't change what the pipeline does, nor does it change particularly how much oil the pipeline's going to push out, because the pipeline hasn't been pushing at maximum amounts ever, in the entire history that pipeline has existed, right? So it's interesting that this is something that's been going on. Yeah, it has been on hold since July due to a Supreme Court ruling, but regardless of that, I don't think that it's going to have a chance of finishing. But what's not understood by this is by a lot of people is that it isn't a new pipeline, an extension on an old pipeline, and it's
Yeah,
a
and isn't most of it
rerouting to make it
being?
more efficient. But it is not a it's not like it has major economic effects, which is kind of ridiculous in that why are people fighting so hard for this thing if it clearly poisons the water of native persons?
Because
It
it's
clearly,
become a cultural touchstone for them. It's become a
yeah, but I
culture.
mean, like, it's a dumb one, right? Like, choose a better touchstone or
They're
something.
all dumb cultural
No, like, you can
touchstones.
make a legitimate argument for stuff that he's doing now is bad. You could make the argument that stopping drilling on federally owned lands is a bad idea. You could make the argument that stopping drilling in the Gulf of Mexico would be bad, right? These are things you can make arguments for.
Sure.
This XL pipeline is not it, right? Like,
Well, and also people make it out like it's going to impact American oil workers, but isn't most of the stuff that it transports like Canadian tar sands?
so the people who are affected are pipeliners,
Oh, okay.
right? And it makes sense because I mean
I
it's
just skimmed your
massive.
online interactions when I was looking at this because I saw that you had posted about this a while back, so I had just
Chicken
skimmed it.
Little.
Yeah.
It's oddly ridiculous. So there were two other actions he took, right? Well, several other actions. What were the other ones?
So Biden is ordering the transition of the entire fleet of federal vehicles that's employed by the executive branch to shift over to electric cars. This is to stimulate the automotive industry and also to cut carbon emissions by the federal government, which does a lot of driving. They put a lot of miles on the road. One of the interesting things I learned about this is Nancy Pelosi has bought stock in Tesla.
Who hasn't bought stock in Tesla? Stock in Tesla?
I don't have stock in Tesla, no.
Oh, you made a mistake.
Yeah.
I bought stock in Tesla like 5 years ago, bro. Get on my level. I'm joking. I have like 100 share. I have like 100th of a share. I feel like right now, but
No, so I have like not invested into the stock market because it is rather difficult for me to do so because of what my mom does.
what does your mom do?
She's works at a consulting firm that could potentially like have insider trading
Ah, okay,
implications.
okay.
So basically anything
If
I
you
want to
make
invest
too
in.
much money, Mama gets in trouble. I got you. I
Yeah,
got you.
potentially. I don't want my mom to get in trouble.
That makes sense.
Plus, I'm not super confident that that this system is going to last. So
So it comes down to Eric loves his mommy, so he doesn't invest on the stock market.
I love my mom. Yeah.
Okay, well, we know I'm sure. I hope your mom's watching right now, and
She's
she
not.
just got to
This is
hear
way this is way too left for her.
that her son still loves her,
This is way too left for
even
her.
though she's way too right for him. All right.
Uh,
So, and then we also have
the
the
cessation of drilling on public lands.
cessation of drilling public lands. Also, the announcement of public goals. The two public goals that were aggressively announced was that we would be net zero by 2035, and by 2050 be a zero carbon economy. Which I don't think either of those things is going to occur. Oh, sorry, it was net zero in the electricity market. And we're going to
Okay.
turn all electricity into renewable by 2035. And by 2050, be a zero emission economy, a net zero emission economy. It doesn't mean no emissions for people who don't understand. It means that you're producing reciprocal emissions reductions that are sufficient to offset any emissions you create.
Right. Another thing that is happening is I know that they're taking it seriously as like a national security issue, um, which has been the recommendation from the U.S. Army and parts of the intelligence community since the Bush administration. They did this Millennium Report in like the late '90s, and climate change was one of the major issues that was isolated there. It has just been ignored by everyone from Clinton to Bush to uh, Obama, and then definitely ignored by Trump.
So, Sud said, do y'all think that we can get these things into legislation? That way they are harder for Republicans to roll back. I don't think we will. I think
Democrats have to they'd have to get rid of the filibuster. Uh, they'd have to like do enough popular shit to get like control of the Senate in 2022 or 2022. And it doesn't look like they're being that aggressive on doing really popular shit. So
yeah, I also just think that like the only way in which you're going to get a progressive movement on these sorts of things is for a continuity of voter choice. It's going to take a decade of voters voting the same direction to get stuff like this to actually stick.
well, if we adopted things like ranked choice voting, if the Senate was fixed, if the Supreme Court was expanded, if DC and Puerto Rico were added, all of these things could have could definitely shift it. I think another thing that we're not considering enough is like, does the Republican Party continue to implode? I'm skeptical that it does, because it seems like they're starting to close ranks and that they're starting to get their message discipline back together, and they're basically deciding that they want to be the Trump party. Hopefully I'm wrong, and hopefully they continue to have these internal disagreements, but
So part of me doesn't think that it matters. And the reason why I say this is because so much groundwork has been done by Democrats in the 2020 election that, I mean, think about all of these people that were like Capitol rioters and were, or like the same, but not at the Capitol, right? These sorts of individuals, like, how can they not feel completely disenfranchised?
that's true. And that is something that I think about. Like, how do like, if they still think that their votes don't matter, I think we have a repeat of Georgia.
But I mean, just like all these Q people as well, right? That like, Biden gets inaugurated and they're all like, what happened? Right? Like, this was all supposed to not happen. And it's like, a lot of people are either A, like got burnt by Q, or that's how they feel, or B, feel like they got burnt by Republicans, or C, feel like they got burnt by Trump. Right? All three of those worlds exist for different groups of people. And those were the people that were the difference makers in the 2016 election. Right? Those were the silent voters that turned polls.
That's
right?
true. But here's,
because you look at Hillary Clinton before the election, she looked like she was going to win that thing. The thing is that these Q voters and these sorts of very edge conservative voters, right, would not answer polling questions and were purposely screwing up the data, right? Just like these Wall Street bet guys who knew what they were doing. They're purposely screwing up these stocks. these QAnon people, these 4chan people, which was before the QAnon people, and these 8chan people before that, right? Like all kind of their whole modus operandi was don't tell liberals anything, right? Don't communicate. Like it's a complete separatism, right? So when, a poll, even a Fox News poll would call them, they'd be like, nah, I ain't taking a poll, right? But what percentage of those people are like, not only am I not taking a poll, I'm not showing up at the poll.
Right.
I don't think you can rely upon it as a Democrat, but I don't think that you can rely upon those people coming back as a Republican.
Right. I guess my worry is that like there are parts of this country where it's just it's a dirty word, like Democrat is a dirty word, and I don't know that that Republicans don't gain back control of the Senate. Yes, Democrats did a lot of groundwork in 2020, but they didn't learn the lessons from 2016 and 2020. They got lucky because of the pandemic. I am not sure that Democrats will learn the lessons from 2020 in 2022 and 2024, if that makes sense.
I think 2022 is a totally different election than 2024 will be.
Yeah, and it's a referendum on Biden.
Huh?
It's a referendum on Biden.
Well, assuming he runs again. Yes.
Well, no. 2022 is a referendum on Biden because midterms are always a referendum on the sitting president.
They are, but they're also smaller elections with less turnout, right?
Which is why they swing for Republicans.
Yeah, which is normally good for Republicans. But the question is the ground game so set? Like, the George is not going to be up, right? But how many secret Georges exist, right? Like, Georgia won't be up. Texas won't be up, right? No Texas senators will be up. No Georgia senators will be up.
There will be House seats up in Texas.
Oh, there's House seats up everywhere. It's a midterm. Yeah. But there's no senatorial seats up, right? So, talking about turning the Senate or what the Senate looks like afterwards. I mean, these are long off questions, but I don't know if, like, it's very, there was a very important argument made during, after Romney was that for whatever reason, the Republicans have purposefully made themselves a minority party. Right? They are the minority party in the right? They win through mechanisms and through math games, right? And that's how they win their elections, right? Because they don't have the broader support of the American population, right? They can't win in almost any major city in the United States. Republicans can't win in those places, right? So if that's all occurring, then like what world do you live in which they can, what world can they win without that Tea Party, Trump, QAnon conspiracy crew, right? How do they win without those people? And or does that just mean that the primaries become the elections for Republicans? Like, if the Q people don't like the person, they don't come back.
Yeah.
So does that push the party even further right?
I think it has to. But remember, Trump also expanded his majority with Black and Latino voters and gay voters, at least relative to where he was prior. Which that report that we were talking about, that post-Romney report that came out, that was one of the things that they wanted to do. So maybe, in my mind, maybe they see a path to victory by embracing Trumpism and expanding into these communities that have strong senses of machismo and stuff like that. Maybe they view that as a way to make inroads with those demographics, with Black and Latino male voters.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, we don't really know the answer to these questions, but I think that that's a good kind of question, right? Can they really even make inroads any further than Trump did with those voters, right? Like, that's the question,
really
right?
Know. I really have no idea. Right. I'll be interested to start seeing polls in about a year once we start getting close enough to actually give a shit. But
I think the better question won't be the polls. I think the better question is what will be the outcome differences between polls and elections, because one of the things that's interesting is polling data was wrong in a lot of states this year, including Georgia, right?
Right.
Um, because Georgia became a more important race than it had been, right? Warnock and what's the other little fella's name? Tiny little white guy,
Asif.
Ossoff, right? Both were polling not great against their opponents, right? They both were losing on election day, right? But not by enough, so they both went to runoffs, right? Biden carried Ossoff over the line. And then they became more important elections. They were the who wins the Senate elections, right? And that gave them more impetus. But if you look at Michigan, if you look at Wisconsin, if you look at Pennsylvania, while they all ended up, Biden wins, if you look at the polling data versus the actual votes, right, they were slim, very, very small wins. When third in polls, like Biden was up 8 points in Pennsylvania for the election.
Yeah, but I think a lot of the I'm willing to give the pollsters a bit more latitude this time around than I was in 2016 because they it's really hard to measure normally. It's even harder in a global pandemic when people might not, especially Democratic voters, are more likely to stay home and not vote or forget to vote or things like that. I think it was just harder to predict because of the pandemic this year. But I think we should be skeptical of polling data because I do think that polling makes a lot of assumptions about behavior and there's a lot of methodological flaws that you can fuck up that make it very difficult to get accurate data. But they are interesting indicators when you look at them in aggregate. So I think sites like 538 and stuff like that are generally even though the people that run them are liberals, they're still pretty good resources.
Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I was reading an email. We're currently out of the building due to COVID, so
Oh wow, they let y'all out of the building for COVID?
no, everybody's we're completely virtual right now.
We've been getting emails every day about new cases and they won't let us go home.
We got to the point in which there were too many teachers out to cover classes.
Well, HIs did that. Never mind. I'm not going to say any more about where I work because
Coming for you.
yeah, I just don't want to. Anyway, all right. Well, we talked about the wackadoodle Q people. Let's finish off with the big wacko, or at least one of the two big wackos right now. That's kind of become a surrogate for Trump in the national conversation. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, the lady who filed articles of impeachment against Joe Biden on his first official day as president, it has come to light that she was liking a bunch of tweets about murdering prominent Democrats, particularly Nancy Pelosi. And this is an ongoing, sort of not shocking at all, but set of revelations nonetheless that she and Representative Boebert have a history of have done some things that are questionable and putting other Congress people at work in harm's way. Now, there's no love lost between me and Nancy Pelosi. She doesn't know who I am, and I actively dislike her. And there's a lot of these centrist people that I don't really care for either. I have a great deal of respect for AOC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley and Jamal Bowman. Those people, as well as Nancy Pelosi, deserve a safe place to go to work. Newt Gingrich, who's not even in that house anymore, deserves a safe place to go to work. Who are the Republicans in the House that are Kevin McCarthy? Kevin McCarthy deserves a safe place to go to work.
It seems
Like,
reasonable, right? Like everyone deserves a safe place to go to work. Right?
yeah,
Like
exactly.
everyone, right?
Exactly.
Um,
And it seems to me like these two congresswomen, Boebert and Taylor Greene, are just dangerous to their coworkers. They're creating a hostile work environment. And like, I think any move to suspend them from Congress is, or expel them from Congress is good, which apparently, according to chat, they are expelled.
yeah.
There's,
Although I think there's only ever been one expulsion.
I mean, these would warrant it.
I think likely what you're going to get is censure, not expulsion. Censure is far more likely to occur. Um,
Is censure going to be effective?
huh?
Is censure going to be effective?
Is censure what?
Is it going to be effective?
No, but if it's not, then because they've been censured, they are a violation of their censure, and thus expulsion becomes a easier sell.
That's fair. I just do not think that these two people have much sense about them. And so I think that, like,
Well, clearly the people who voted for them also don't have very much sense, so perhaps they're good representatives.
uh, I think they're people who have the brain worms.
You know, so I was talking Katie about this, and I think it's true. Until people of all persuasions are willing to say there are certain things that are good things and there are certain things that are bad things, and we're just going to agree on certain things as being good and bad, and then we're going to all demand upon our congresspersons and our senators to do that good thing. And there's certain things that we all agree are good, right? Um, until we're willing to do that, and then regardless of party affiliation, vote them out for not doing the thing that the people asked them to do, we'll never get beyond people voting R&D.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I think there's a sell here, Eric. Here's my sell, right? I think there's a sell. Let's say, right, we most people in the world, right, would say that, you know, companies should not, you know, this is something that actually happened, right? There was a law that was passed. Companies should not target children to sell cigarettes, right? We all agree on that. Conservatives agree on that. Liberals agree on that. Leftists agree on that. Right wing authoritarians. We all agree, right? That's a bad thing. You should not target ads at children, right? For cigarettes. That's a terrible idea, right? Now, if we had gone to Congress, let's say that that was still legal, right? And we go to Congress and we say, you should do this. And then our congressperson or our senator doesn't vote for it, we as a body of people need to have a social organization that cross cuts enough that we can come to agreements on specific things that says you don't do this, you're not going to be in office, right? And that can mean two things, right? It can mean that the more conservative side, if it's a conservative person, will commit to primarying that person, right? And if it's
Mhm.
the leftist side, they commit to primarying that person. And if it's both, they both commit to not voting for that person, right? Regardless of if they get the nomination for the particular colored party that they're a part of,
I think
right?
the problem is that we're so invested in the party politics and the.
I agree, Eric, but I think that like we never get past that unless we create the social controls mechanisms of holding people accountable, right? Because I think the actual outcome that would occur is that any time there was bipartisan agreement of the people towards a senator or towards a congressperson, once this had been done enough times, they would just cede because they would know the threat was real.
The problem is that, like, we have issues where there's large bipartisan agreement. Ending, making weed legal, for example, is a good one.
Another really good one is ending is term limits on congresspersons.
Yeah. Medicare for all is shockingly has over 60% approval among the American
But Medicare
people.
for all, normally there's partisan lines to that. Those other two, there's normally not, right? very conservative people and very liberal people both agree there should be term limits. The people who don't agree on that are the people who are being voted in. The only way we ever get term limits is that we all agree we're going to demand upon our congressperson and our senator to vote for term limits. If they don't vote for term limits, regardless of the letter next to their name, right, we're going to vote them out next time.
So basically, block voting is what you're talking about.
I'm talking about issue specific block voting, right? And you make a demand, right? Like you prioritize your demand, right? So the first demand, and I think this is the demand that liberals, conservatives, everyone can get on board with, is there should be term limits for Congress and senators, right? Everybody agrees to this statement. Most Americans agree that that should occur. But if we could get together and say, hey, you know what? There's some Democrats in the House, right, that aren't going to vote for this. There's some Republicans in the Senate in a city like Houston, right? If you get a large enough group of people together and say, if you don't vote for this, then X percentage of the population that votes for you is not going to vote for you. They're going to vote for whoever else is the person, right? Then they end up losing that power very quickly, and they have to accede to the demands of their populations. The thing is that the threat doesn't work unless there's follow through. The only way you get that follow through is through organization. And I feel like that's the sort of like world in which we can actually create better politics, is if we start holding individual representatives accountable for their actions, right?
Yeah, the problem is like along what line do you do that, and like how do you get to people who are so polarized that they're like, I'll vote for anybody who's supportive of education, but I won't vote for a Democrat, right? Because
But I won't vote what?
Because here, like we're both in a common teacher, we're both in a teacher group and there have been a lot of conversations in that group about organizing and about like block voting. And one of the conversations that comes up in that group when block voting is raised is the issue of like, well, I'll vote for a Democrat who supports that, but I won't vote for a Republican. Republicans do the same thing.
Yeah, but it's ridiculous, right? Like if you're actually going to block vote, then the question isn't the party. The question is, do they do the thing you want?
I agree. I agree, but what I'm telling you is like there are like actually decent reasons not to want to vote for a Republican. And if you're a conservative person, there are they're not good reasons, but there are reasons to not vote for Democrats, right? Like if I think that like the Democrats are supporting a like child sex ring, and I think that that's bad, then like why would I vote?
I think that it requires a level of like a level of frustration with politics and the status quo for people to be willing to eat that bullet.
But we're already there, and
but we're not. Like people claim to be tired and frustrated with party politics, but they're not, because they actively engage in it.
Yeah.
Right? They're liars is what they are, right? If you told me tomorrow, right, like, hey, 2 congresspersons, right, we're gonna hold them to this, right, like I'd be down, right? Like it's not, there's this myth that other than the style of which corporations run America, right, and
right.
like Republicans aren't going to get rid of Roe v. Wade. They'll never do it. You know why? If they did, they'd cut off their hand.
Here's the thing, though. Like, there are issues.
I do get the point of like rights, like particularly gay and trans rights, right?
Right. There are issues other than the ones that we would block vote for.
Yes, there are.
And like those issues are often like hard limits on people. Like if for example, if I think that somebody is gonna tell a trans comrade that they like have to use the bathroom that corresponds to their birth certificate, they're gonna not have access to healthcare and stuff like that. I don't really give a shit that person's like in favor of term limits.
I think that it's a process in which like the argument would be well, but here's the thing. It's not a statement of support for that person if they do what you tell them to do. It's an absolute withdrawal of support if they don't.
Yeah,
You know
but
what
if
I'm
I was
saying?
to support that person, I would also be like, if I was supporting him on the basis of that one issue, I'd also be supporting other issues as well that I don't necessarily sign on to. And I think that's the problem with like single issue block voting is that
Well, and the
like
problem is
candidates.
that it already exists and we can't overcome it unless we're willing to do it ourselves.
I agree, but that's why I think we err on the side of doing it ourselves, or at least like shifting the national conversation or providing proof of concept at smaller scale elections, which is a great segue into our big announcement about next week. See how I did that?
Get it? That's a good
Okay,
segue.
so uh, I have a friend who has been religiously watching the show, who works on a campaign for a city council candidate in San Antonio. The candidate's name is Terry Castillo. She is running to be the city council representative for District 5 in San Antonio. I have no idea geographically where that is. We're going to have to ask Terry to tell us where it is, and we're going to have to ask her about what the issues that afflict that community are and what her proposed solutions for those are. But we're going to get the opportunity to actually talk about somebody who is like engaging in local electoral politics. And we're hoping that it's going to be a great time, and that'll be the first of many people who are either doing local electoral politics or mutual aid projects that we can talk to, and kind of broadcast a little bit, because we want to help people who are trying to make the world a little bit better.
So, yeah, I'm looking very much forward to do that. It looks like it's in southern San Antonio is where District 5 is.
Yeah,
Southwestern.
I saw that she posted some stuff about being on the south side earlier today.
Yeah. Looks like it's southwestern portions of it assuming that the District 5 City Council's office is in fact in District 5. But it may not be. So we are looking forward to that. It will probably likely what we will do next Wednesday is we will have her on, her or they on. I don't know what pronoun she uses or they use.
I believe
But
I believe Terry uses she/her pronouns.
she her pronouns. Okay. But I will make sure that we are. We will what will likely occur is we will do the interview, and then we will take a small intermission, and then we will start the show.
Yeah. So the interview is going to be starting at 7, and it's going to run for 20 to 25 minutes, because that is all the time that they could budget for us. So we'll have to get in. We'll have our list of questions prepared ahead of time.
Yep.
And there'll be a blend of like philosophy, more like philosophy worldview kind of questions and policy questions.
I'm
Because I
also
think
going to ask about her history. I don't know anything about her.
okay, that's fair.
I want to know who she is, where
Yeah,
she comes from.
I would classify that as like philosophy worldview kind of questions.
Yep. Awesome. So it has been an awesome show with y'all tonight. Super awesome chat interactions. We're down for that. We love that, guys and gals. Keep it up. And we will be back next Wednesday with an awesome interview of San Antonio City Councilwoman. Future, because we're going to help her get elected. Maybe. Find out on the next episode of the Partisan Podcast.